Hey Goblin, you've been really practicing those war drums.
I'll bring the generic Goblin noise!
Hey gang! Using the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, will get you 10% off any order over $10 at FLIPSIDE Gaming. It'll also get you 10% off any orders of singles at Multizone. And it'll get you 10% off most products at Original Magic Art, with the exceptions of some paintings. If these fine sites don't have what you're looking for, you can also consider using my affiliate link when ordering from TCGPLAYER. And if you'd like to join the generic Goblin gang to support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description below. Today's game is the first of many games that I filmed at Magic Fest Montreal. It was an incredible experience, both from the support that I got from the judges, the tournament organizers, and the players around. It was fantastic being able to meet so many people and play so many games. In today's game, I am playing fan favorite Krenko, keeping a Goblin Chieftain, a Bloodmark Mentor, 2 Snow-Covered Mountains, Goblin Chainwhirler, Goblin Instigator, and Ashling's Prerogative. You might remember Phil, and he's playing his Keurig deck, keeping a Dictate of Erebos, Solemn Simulacrum, Praetor's Grasp, Bloodghast, Westville Abbey, and 2 Swamps. New to the channel, and I'm thankful for joining us, Tan has brought his newly sleeved Emry deck, keeping a Burnished Heart, a Never-Flowing Chalice, Kuldratha Forgemaster, Tribute Mage, Urza's Bauble, and 2 Islands. Joining us is Tan's friend Tien, playing Yasova, keeping an Island, an Izzet Boilerworks, a Thornwood Falls, Mass Mutiny, Active Aggression, a Snow-Covered Island, and Nature's Lore. Tan wins the die roll and starts us off. Tan plays an Island and passes. Tien plays a tapped Thornwood Falls and gains 1 life. I play Snow-Covered Mountain and I pass to Phil. Phil plays a Swamp in front and passes. Tan plays an Island and casts Urza's Bauble. He's then able to cast Emry for only 2, and Phil and I trip out a bit. With Emry coming in, Tan mills himself for 4 cards and passes. Tien plays an Island and casts Nature's Lore to find a land and passes to me while searching. I play a Snow-Covered Mountain and cast Krenko's Command. Phil plays a Swamp and drops Bloodghast. At the end of turn, Tan uses his Bauble to look at a random card in Phil's hand and put the delayed draw trigger into play. Tan draws from the Bauble and for turn, and he plays an Island and then activates Emry to essentially give an artifact flashback. He recasts the Bauble from his yard for free and drops the Burnished Heart from his hand before passing to Tien. Tien plays an Island and casts Awakening Zone and passes. I play Snow-Covered Mountain and I cast Goblin Chieftain. Heading to combat, I hit Phil and Tan for 2 each with 1 Goblin apiece. Phil plays a Swamp and pays 3 for Praetor's Grasp. He targets Tan to get an idea what's in his library, and he goes through it and picks 1 card and exiles it. After Tan gives his deck a good shuffle, Phil hits Tien for 2 with Bloodghast. At the end of Phil's turn, Tan uses the Bauble again to see another random card from Phil's hand. Tan draws from the Bauble trigger and for turn. He plays an Island and taps Emry again for the Bauble. 4 mana then gets Tan the Antiquities War, but sadly Tan has no artifact to reveal from the top 5. Heading to combat, he then hits me for 2 and passes. Tien gets an Eldrazi spawn in his upkeep and brings out Yasova Dragonclaw in his first main phase. He then drops an Izzet Boilerworks, which has him bouncing a basic back to hand, and with nothing else, Tien passes. I draw and play a tap Valakut. I then cast a Prismatic Lens, and I use the rest of my mana for Goblin Instigator, who comes in with a Goblin Friend. I then go to combat, and I hit Phil for 8. Phil plays a Westville Abbey, and then a Soul Ring. 4 mana has Solemn Simulacrum come into play, and Phil finds another basic Swamp. Heading to combat, the Bloodghast hits Tan for 2. Phil then passes, and at the end of turn, as he's done the last couple of turns before this, Tan does what Tan does, and uses his bauble to see a random card, but this time from my hand. Tan draws from the bauble and for turn, and then resolves his Saga uptick. He reveals a scrap trawler and puts it to hand. Emry then gets tapped again, and we see the bauble for what feels like the millionth time. Tan then casts a very glared out, unfortunately ever-flowing chalice, where it's been multi-kicked twice, and he heads to combat. He doesn't attack though, and instead passes through his phases. Chen gains his second spawn, and plays an island for turn. He heads to combat, paying for Yasova's ability, and steals Emry from Tan. Chen then has Emry swing at me, and I happily block her with my chieftain. I play a mountain for turn, and bring up Big Daddy Krenko. I then tap Krenko, making 6 more tokens, and then play a Bloodmark Mentor. 9 goblin tokens go at Phil for playing his lands in front. And Phil blocks 1 with his Solemn, drawing as it dies, and taking the rest. Phil casts his own Soul Ring in his main phase, and has to die now for having 2. We see a Rune-Scarred Demon hitting the field, and Phil goes and finds a card for his hand. Phil then plays a Bloodstained Mire, and hits Tan again for 2 with Bloodghast. Tan removes the final counter from his Saga, animating his artifacts into 5/5s, and then draws for turn, asking what's the problem. I tell him that I'm not a threat, and heading to combat, Tan swings 2 artifacts at me, and I take the hit and lose 10 life. With nothing else, Tan passes. Tien gains another spawn in his upkeep, and Phil suggests Tien steal my chieftain and he'll block with his demon. Tien then plays a Kessig Wolfrun for his land for turn, and using Yasova's combat trigger, steals the chieftain and takes Phil up on his offer, swinging it at him. Phil blocks with a demon, and I say goodbye to my chieftain. With nothing else, Tien passes. I play an Ashling's Prerogative in my main phase and choose Evens, giving all creatures with converted mana cost that's even haste, while tapping all odd converted mana cost creatures as they come in. This means when I tap Krenko, which I do, the 9 new goblin tokens I get have haste. I swing the team at Phil, who having just tutored, more than likely now has a board wipe in hand. Tan offers Phil a deal, saying he'll save him from this attack step if Phil leaves him alone for 2 turns. Phil agrees, and Tan pays 5 for an evacuation. In my post-combat main phase, I recast the Instigator and pass. Phil taps 1 Soul Ring for an expedition map, floating 1 mana, and taps the other to crack it and find a land. He goes to find a Cabal Coffers, and also cracks his Bloodstained Mire to save himself some time. He plays the Coffer for turn, and then activates it, and brings out Kirik, losing 2 life to the Phyrexian mana cost. Kirik unfortunately comes in tapped though, and Phil then casts Bloodghast, giving Kirik a +1/+1 counter, before passing turn. Tan plays an island for turn, and brings back out the Burnished Heart. He's then able to easily recast Emry thanks to the reduction from his artifacts, and he mills himself for 4 cards as she enters. Tan then casts a Chief Engineer, and we make a small mistake which we do remedy in a minute, as Tan taps some of his creatures to help cast Scrap Trawler, some of which should have been tapped. Chen gains a spawn, and casts a tapped Yasova. Tan catches his mistake at this point, and returns the Trawler to his hand, and keeps the Heart and Emry tapped as they should be. Tan then moves to combat, paying for her ability to steal Kirik, who still has less power than she does, and he swings Kirik at me. I take 3 commander damage, and Tien gains 3 life. In his post-combat main phase, Tien then uses Life's Legacy, sacrificing Phil's commander as part of the cost to draw 3 cards. Tien then has to discard down to 7 as he passes turn. I play a Buried Ruin, and then an Illusionist Bracers, and then a Goblin Chain Whirler, who comes in tapped. All of my opponents take 1, as do their planeswalkers and their creatures, with a few casualties hitting the yard. Moving to combat, I then hit Phil for 2, and I pass my turn. Phil activates his Coffer once more, making 5 black mana, and then a Soul Ring for Rune-Scarred Demon again, He heads to his library to tutor for a card, and immediately drops a Massacre afterwards, and a lot of creatures die, with me losing the most life at 4 life with 2 creatures hitting my bin, and Tan loses 2 from his Burnished Heart dying. With nothing else, Phil passes. At the end of turn, Tan taps his bauble and sacrifices it to look at a random card from Phil's hand. Tan draws from the bauble, and for turn, asks the table how many cards they have in hand. Phil has 5, which is enough for Tan to justify using Windfall. Tan then drops a Torment's Crypt for 0 mana, and then a tap Foundry Inspector. Tan is then able to tap his Chief Engineer to pay for the reduced cost of a Mere Retriever, and with nothing else, passes. Tien makes an Eldrazi spawn in his upkeep, and draws. He plays a tap Mosswort Bridge as his land for turn, and hides away a card under it. We then see From Beyond, and I remind Tien to tap his Mosswort Bridge. I draw, and play a Snow-Covered Mountain. I then pay 4 mana for Purphoros, and Phil's starting to sweat it. It resolves, after Tan gives me a nod, and I drop a Goblin Lackey, dealing 2 to my opponents. Tien asks if Purphoros is a creature, which he is at this point, and I pass to Phil. Phil plays a Swamp and brings back Bloodghast. He activates the coffers for Narcana Revenant, which is scary, but Torment is thankfully already in his yard. He then drops a Twisted Abomination and a Withered Wretch. Unfortunately, my Ashling's Prerogative is working against me at this point, and Phil is able to swing with all of his evenly costed creatures, which just so happens to be everything. I block like this, but still take 16, and Phil activates the Revenant enough times to live through Purphoros blocking it, and regenerates the Abomination. Tan plays an island and recasts Emry, who comes in tapped. He still gets to mill himself for 4 cards though. He then resolves a Bedeem, Console of Innovation, and hits Phil for 1 with the Retriever before passing. At the end of turn, Chan uses his From Beyond's activated ability to sacrifice it and go and find an Eldrazi. He finds Void Winnower and puts it to hand. Chen gains his spawn in his upkeep, and then plays a Fabled Passage, cracking it and finding a basic, which gets untapped because he has 4 more lands. He then taps 5 mana for an Indomitable Creativity, and destroys his 2 Eldrazi spawn, revealing off the top until he hits Ashland's Altar and then an Atali. Chen then heads to combat as Atali has haste, and swings Atali at Phil, and we all flip our top cards, with all of them being lands. Unfortunately for Phil, with Atali connecting, he gets taken out. I draw for turn and play a Snow-Covered Mountain, dealing 3 to Emry with the Valakut trigger. I then move to combat and swing the team at Tien, who responds before moving to blockers by casting Ray of Command. He steals Purphoros, untapping it and blocking my Chain Whirler, and then takes 1. Responding to my Lackey trigger, Tien sacrifices Purphoros to the altar, which now that I think of it, I'm not too sure if he could have done, since I don't think it would have been a creature when he controlled it. I then put out a Warren Instigator, and I pass my turn. Tan draws for turn, and for Bedeem, and drops a land. He casts Joyrus Familiar, reducing his artifacts even further, and then drops Duplicant to exile Atali. We then see Emry return again, and mill Tan for 4 more cards. Moving to combat, he swings a Retriever at me for 1, and the rest at Tien. Tien gains a spawn in his upkeep and plays an island. He recasts his commander, who comes in tapped, and moves to combat, paying her triggered ability's cost to steal Emry. He untaps Emry, and hits Tan for 1, and then sacrifices her for 2 colorless in his post-combat main phase to the altar before passing. I play Nykthos for turn, and activate it for 4, paying 2 more for Krenko. I tap Krenko for 3 tokens, and I swing them at Tan for 3 before passing. Tan untaps and draws from Badine and for turn. He plays an island and casts Ethereum Sculptor, with his artifacts now costing him 3 colorless less to play. Krark Clan Ironworks then comes out, and at this point, Tan is able to sacrifice the Retriever for 2 colorless to bring back his Workshop Assistant. He can then cast the Workshop Assistant for free and sacrifice it for 2 colorless and bring back the Retriever, and basically cycle this ad infinitum to make as much mana as he wants. At one point, he decides to bring back a 1000-year elixir, and he casts it, and then Emry. He hits an Aetherflux Reservoir off the first 4 cards he's milled, which he's able to cast from his yard by untapping Emry with the elixir, and then continue his combo with the Junk Diver he has in his hand to win the game. Game review time. So, this was a particularly strong showing from Emry, but I've heard through the grapevine that she's a very strong commander. Not as strong as Urza, let's say, but still a lot of fun, and she synergizes so well with artifacts, which Blue already loves to play with anyway. As much as I love Mono Black, I think the deck that really caught my attention was the Yasova Dragonclaw deck. I love the idea of stealing other opponents' creatures and then sacrificing them or using them to your own benefit and destroying them before giving them back. Tian did a great job of doing this, and even though I think he probably couldn't have blocked with the Perforos, it was still a really tight game. Speaking of the Perforos, it probably would have stayed on the field, but I don't think that would have changed too much because I wouldn't have been able to make enough creatures to kill everyone with Perforos, and Tan was only a turn or 2 away from winning. Unfortunately, I don't think Phil's Crix deck really showcased the commander all that much. He really didn't get a chance to since he was so low in life from me smashing him with Goblin tokens over and over again, so I really hope to find a good chance to be able to play with him again and show you what the deck can actually do. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/MTGMudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/MTGMudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.